Hey, it's Concrete. So we've officially reached about the halfway point in Flavorah beta testing videos. This is video number 5. So today I have Apricot, Moscato, and their Amaretto Sour. And again, these are all pre-release flavors. They're available October 6th from Bull City Flavors or Nick River. Um, Fancy disclaimer time. I did not pay for these. It won't affect the thoroughness and thoughtfulness that the internet's sixth best flavor reviewer puts in to evaluating these flavors. So, starting out for today, I have their apricot. I like that one quite a bit. I think it's a really solid, sort of sweet apricot stone fruit flavor. It's bordering on tasting a little bit artificial, but not artificial in a bad way. It's not really a realistic fruit in that, I don't get any like peel or fleshy notes. It just tastes like a very thick, syrupy sort of apricot stone fruit flavor. I think it kind of borders a little bit on something like a cooked yellow peach, but it doesn't do that weird peach ring thing that a lot of the yellow peach flavors do. So this is kind of smooth, warm, and sticky, which is, sticky sounds like a bad thing, but it's a good thing. It's a very sort of heavy, but still fairly mellow flavor. It tastes a little bit like the apricot note from almost like a fruit leather where it's been kind of sweetened and mellowed out a little bit. But then, not leathery, just that nice thick mouthfeel to it. The big question is going to be how it compares to Flavor Arts Apricot, and Flavor Arts Apricot to me is a little bit darker. While this does have like a slightly darker sweetness than just like straight sugar, it's still definitely very bright and sweet. Flavor Arts Apricot is a little bit heavier. It gets a little bit in terms of sweetness, it gets a little bit more earthy. It actually is even probably a little bit stickier than this. This is like a nice bright take on an apricot flavor, though. In terms of the use case for this, I would think that this is going to find a lot of use in sort of exploiting that cooked peach flavor that it has going on and kind of bending that. I could see this working as sort of the base for a very commercial, like peach filling note, where you do have some actual baked peaches in there, but they add just a little bit of artificial flavoring to kind of hammer it home. And this kind of reminds me of that. I think if you layered in a little bit of drier peach, like Flavor Arts White Peach, you could definitely get closer to like an actual peach filling. I also think that it reminds me a lot of the sort of peach note that you get in teas, and like especially like a Lipton black tea or iced tea or something like that. Like it feels like a good, not cloyingly artificial peach note for teas. I think this is going to pair very well with bright fruits just because it doesn't necessarily have that very aggressive in your face flavor. I think it's going to make a really good canvas for like pineapple and strawberry. Other really bright fruits I think will mix well with creams for the most part, just because there's nothing sharp or green here. I think you'll get some generic fruitiness without really a sharp apricot edge if you start mixing with creams. Percentage wise, this is not a weak flavor by any means, but I like it a little bit more when it's up high and you really get some of that sticky mouthfeel. I feel like the actual flavor here isn't particularly aggressive, and so you have a heavier hand to kind of just exploit that texture and that mouthfeel. I like this over like 2% and over. I'd probably go from like 2 to 3.5% really to sort of take advantage of that mouthfeel more than everything else. But it's a really solid flavor, and I have a really big soft spot for interesting fruit flavors, and I think this is going to work really well as sort of a canvas or a background or a base flavor to sort of add sweetness and texture without absolutely dominating other fruit flavors. Next, I have their Moscato, which, is what fancy people drink. I like this, but I think the name might be wrong because when they say Moscato, they're talking about a dessert wine. I don't get anything that really reminds me of a wine out of this. I do get a sort of nice, bright, white grape flavor. It's very thick, very sweet, very syrupy. It reminds me a lot of Flavor Art's white grape, which I do like, but Flavor Art's white grape has this really pronounced hairspray note to it, and this doesn't have that going on so much. I think there is a lighter floral edge, but it kind of reminds me of lychee more than anything else. It doesn't quite cross the line for me over into like hairspray artificial. It also gets really interesting as you start to crank up the percentage. I think if you want it to taste like white grapes, like a sweet white grape, I'd probably stop short of like 1.5%, maybe from 1 to 1.5%. But as you start to sort of increase it a little bit more, and I do like to test a little bit higher just to see what it's going to do, it picks up this really interesting kind of green note on the back. And green is usually not a good thing, but it's green in that it reminds me of Inaware's rhubarb. It has like this weird green tartness to the back end, which I think is going to make it really interesting to sort of blend with if you want to go ahead and crank this up a little bit and start throwing other fruit flavors on the back end, like raspberry is my favorite with rhubarb. In terms of where you'd use this, I think if you did want to take it more in a Moscato direction, I know Flavor Art has a white wine that I haven't had a chance to test yet, but I know it's fairly highly regarded. I think that would end up adding some like sourness and some booziness to this, and I think you could turn it into a dessert wine fairly easily. I do work a lot with champagnes though, and I feel like you can make like a sparkling Prosecco or something along the lines of like a sweeter champagne note just by adding something like Flavor West Pink Champagne, which already has a little bit of that grape note. So it's going to work well to add a little bit of carbonation and still reinforce that very sweet dessert wine kind of vibe. And sort of in the same vein, I feel like it's also going to work if you want to like Flavorah put out their sangria flavor. It didn't really remind me of a chilled sangria at all. I think this is a good wine to sort of build a chilled sangria off of, with some citrus and some apples and stuff like that. And I'm excited for sort of blowing this flavor out intentionally and sort of playing with that greenness at the back, just because I feel like that note does some really interesting things with other fruits. And so I'd like to see this, higher in some sort of weirder, more abstract fruit mixes, something along the lines of like your grape juices or whatever, but just where you're sort of playing with flavor for flavor's sake. But all in all, not a Moscato, good sweet white grape. Gets really interesting as you crank it up, but if you want it to taste like a white grape, 1 to 1.5%. So finally for the day, I have their Amaretto Sour. Amaretto Sours are kind of a bizarre cocktail. You've got a big slug of amaretto, some sour mix in there, maybe some other nonsense. They're very sweet, very fruity. It's basically a hangover in a glass, and this kind of vapes like that. I do find that fresh, you get a brighter citrus note out of it. You can actually pick out some individual like lemon and lime, and it does have like some amaretto, like dark liquor booziness and a little bit of nuttiness to it. It does tend to steep out a little bit flatter than you'd think, just mix it up fresh. After it's steeped, it doesn't really taste nutty to me, but it does taste like almonds. It tastes like the almond note from marzipan. That kind of almond extract note that's actually usually like bitter almonds and apricot pits and all that other nonsense. It definitely has a pretty strong cherry vibe to me, that sort of bakery cherry. And for something that's that cherry forward, there's actually a surprising lack of like weird plasticky off notes. I don't get any of that from this, which is awesome. As you start to crank the percentage up a little bit, there is a cooling note that kind of creeps in too, and it's not particularly noticeable down at low percentages, but once you get up like 2-3%, you start to pick up some of that light cooling. So in terms of using this, I think if you want an actual amaretto sour cocktail, it's one of the very few instances where I say shake and vape is going to be better, because I think this makes a better amaretto sour as a shake and vape, probably about 3%. It's nice, it's sweet, it's fruity, there's some nutty nuance, a little bit of booze, very well balanced as a shake and vape. If you want to actually use it in a recipe and you want to start steeping, I would look at this as sort of another option for bolstering cherry flavors. So there's this big thing on trying to make a cherry flavor that isn't complete garbage, especially a bakery cherry. And you see marzipan used a lot there for that kind of almond extract, like bitter almond cherry note. This might do a better job of that just because it has a texture that's going to work a little bit better for a filling. It's a little bit more syrupy, a little bit more sweet. I find that the citrus here kind of fades out and just makes like a tartar cherry base flavor. I think if you were going to use it as a bakery cherry, I'd keep the percentage relatively low. In terms of using it in other mixes, it does kind of fade to something that almost tastes like a maraschino cherry. And so I think there's a lot of application in cocktails, not so much for the amaretto note, but for that sort of maraschino cherry vibe. I could see using this in like an old fashioned with some bourbon, you know, kind of aping some of that sweetness and that cherry there. There's also like the blood and sand. If you wanted to use Flavor Arts whiskey, which is more of like a scotch, you could use this as a stand-in for like cherry hearing or something like that. I think you can also go back to the big well of bar tricks, and I think if you were gonna use some of this over like Flavor Arts Cola, I think you get damn close to something like a Dr. Pepper, which would be really interesting. I think if you start to crank up the cherry note even on top of what's already in the amaretto, I think you could probably move it closer to something like a cherry coke too, which you know would be awesome. But in terms of use percentage, again, it's going to vary sort of with what you want to do with it. I do think that as like a sub 1% accent, it should do good things for bakery cherries. In those like cocktail applications, I'd look more towards like 1.5, maybe up to 2.5%. The places where the cooling isn't really going to get in your way and you want kind of a brighter, sweeter flavor. But that was video number 5. Video number 6 will be upcoming shortly. But yeah, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. I'll catch you later.